Welcome back to the Elevate Your Best podcast. My name is Michael Danklefs.
And I am Bruno Martins. And today we are going to talk about intellectual life.
This is an important subject for me because in the Lifebook program, we do look at each of the major categories and review that each of the months of the year. So last month we talked about health and fitness, and this month we're talking about intellectual life. So when we talk about Lifebook, we're really looking at how do we live a 12 category smart life? So how do we live in many ways a balanced way for us within the framework is so that you are not just physically healthy, you're also working on your brains. You're not just in great relationships with a love partner, you also have a social life where you actually have friends that also support you to win, where it's not just about the work that you're doing, it's also about the impact you're making on the world. So this month though, we're looking at intellectual life and what that looks like and how it's shown up for us. And that's really the part that I want to focus on is what does the framework look inside of that? That intellectual, we think of big-brained people. We're thinking of Einstein. We're thinking of big thinkers. But each of us has a way of seeing the world. Each of us has a way of processing information. And really what we want to focus on is a couple of different phases of this and in different aspects of our intellectual life. One is what we learn. One is what we review. One is what we remember. And the last is what we produce. And why all four of these is important is it's not all about input. It's also about what we do with it. So it is really about the four phases of our intellectual life. So balance is important in this. And it's one of the things that I seek in my life as well as what I seek to bring to others in my coaching practice. And as an example, it used to be a huge conflict in the sci-fi world is there's huge Star Wars fans and there are huge Star Trek fans. You got the Star Wars geeks and you got the Trekkies. I grew up in a household where we loved both. We found balance in both the Force as well as the technology. They both have different attributes that to me are important. There's the mythology and the fantasy aspect of Star Wars, even though it is set in a place that is far away. And Star Trek was always about really science fiction. It is what is possible. And the idea of a communicator, so many people had flip phones after they explored this in a TV show and in movies, that it's now become our reality. It's really based on the science of it. And the different perspectives I look to mold in my life to find that balanced space of, yes, it's great to think big and to actually think of areas where we can grow in and actually think through, but it's also a matter of let's also use our logic, let's use our knowledge, let's apply our knowledge in different places. So
you mentioned Star Wars, Michael. I just want to quickly do an off-topic check. Have you seen the final scene of Rogue One, where Darth Vader gets into the ship? And have you seen that one?
yes.
That must be the most awesome scene ever. Like that was really cool.
Yes, and with that, it very much plays into the rest of the universe. You actually see where this plugs right in. They actually did really well with the transition from one to the next, because the movie Rogue One came from a single line in the crawl in A New Hope.
That was great. I love that scene. And it was so cool to see that before where everything started, you can see that there was this epic moment there with Darth Vader. And the time that he lights a lightsaber and he goes towards people, it's awesome. But I like as well, coming back to the topic, that you spoke about balance. And Michael, when we speak about the 12 areas of our lives, there is this necessity for balance. And it is a great challenge because most people are unbalanced on their lives. I do see that people usually take care of work and career and love relationships and parenting. Sometimes just love relationships don't even take care of the parenting, the family side of things. My father, for example, he had like me and my sister with my mother. He has two older children and a younger one. And we spoke a few months ago was the last time we spoke. I remember I commented with you, and I faced him with some truths like, you abandoned us, you didn't provide for us, you were not there, and your absence. Have you thought about how much your absence was missed? And for himself, Michael, he was a great present father that provided us with everything that we needed. And I was like, are you crazy? You don't even know my birthday. You never call me on my birthday. And you talk things like that. But it's because there is an imbalance there. And the person thinks that area of their lives that they should take care of, they can take care of, is being taken care of, when indeed it's like a bike that if you go out with it, it will be blowing smoke and falling to pieces because it's being neglected. And we had to take care of our intellectual lives. I have a daily practice, Michael. I don't know if you do. Because it's everything about preparation. How do we prepare our environment so that it is productive and that we can learn, so that we can absorb the lessons? I have a great environment set up for me on Notion, where I do a lot of things, a lot of my routines, and one of them is related to a daily growth routine. How do you prepare, Michael, your day, your mindset, so that in every day you are learning and you have this growth on your intellectual life, which is such an important life of our area of our lives?
As we're going to talk about this first phase of what we learn, and being one of the core pillars of the coaching practice I lead, the first one is preparation. It is actually preparing your day, preparing the events you're going into. It's knowing what tools, knowledge, and resources you need in order to be the most effective in that next step of what we're going into. So for me, part of that preparation is a couple of habits that I do in the morning. So some of those things are setting my intention for the day, having some things that I'm committed to every single day. And I generally, for me, on the accountability side, the third phase or the third corporate pillar of the coaching practice is accountability. Is that kind of sets the stage of, I've got a deadline by the end of the day that this needs to be done. So that's one aspect of this. What am I going to learn today? But there's also this kind of, we're going to be moving into the next phase with kind of the second part of that. But part of it is, for me, I know that I consider myself a lifelong learner. And that's my attitude, is something that even that my grandfather repeated is, if I'm not learning something every day, then I'm dying. And he would actually, if he didn't feel like he learned anything, he would actually flip to a page in the dictionary and look up the definition of a word. So he knew actually he had more knowledge from that day versus the previous day. So even just this mindset of, I'm going to learn something every day and I'm open to learning something every day, is part of that preparation and starting my day off with that.
I do agree with this idea of lifelong learner. It's about the compound effect, right? That idea of Jim Rohn, that we can change the place that we are overnight. We can change our location overnight, but we can change our direction. And this idea of your grandfather always learning at least a word every day, it means that I have progress. There are a lot of things there, like the commitment, the long term, the vision. We talk about all that. And those are not secrets of the universe that are hidden and protected away. Those are simple things that most of us might even have heard about in life. The definition of the day, like this is something that you can play with a child. Hey, what's the word of the day? And things like that. Those are simple things. And another thing that I learned in my life is that sometimes we search for huge solutions for our problems, thinking like, oh, this is bothering me so much, I need a magical solution. And usually the solutions are very simple. We just need to take action on them. And I like the idea of the lifelong learner. This is something that if we decide, I will learn every day of my life and I'll always learn with new people and things like that, it's a great decision for our lives.
It also, as well, it's what is that base belief that we have about ourselves? What is the identity that we have about ourselves? As an example, for me, I actually appreciate the fact that I've had people call me a nerd. Mostly, I think, because of my discernment of the difference in the definition of nerd, geek, and dork. Is, for me, the way that I've heard it expressed is a geek is someone who has knowledge that isn't valuable that you can use and get paid for. A nerd is someone who has information or knowledge that they can actually give and receive value from. They can actually, so a computer nerd is someone who knows computers well enough that they can get paid for it. And a dork is someone who knows the difference. So I very much like this idea of being a nerd. And I may not look it. In fact, I was standing in a circle at one point next to someone, glasses, slender frame, nerdy looking, and asked me what I do. And I told him I do programming. And he goes, okay, I look the part of the nerd. You look the part of a contractor who would actually be building houses, because the outside doesn't always necessarily reflect what's on the inside. I like using my brain to come up with better solutions. And even from this idea of starting my day of, I'm going to learn, that is part of my identity. I know when we listen to John Busher, one of his identity things is that he is a lifelong athlete, and it shows in how he shows up. For me, it's actually my intellectual capacity that I looked is one of the main areas that I look to nurture and grow in. And being open, once again, not just to be right, it's also to gain more knowledge that we can then act on and gain more wisdom. We're going into that in a little bit too.
And about this lifelong learning and being this or being that, I do believe it's important for us to think about that. Even so, if we identify with something today, we don't need to be identifying with that thing forever. We can change. So it taps into that idea of the growth mindset. If we are lifelong learners, we might be in a nice way to develop a growth mindset. But what I realize about the growth mindset is that the person can have a growth mindset towards the athletic life, but then they can have a fixed mindset towards the romantic life or the intellectual life. So there are different approaches for different things in life. And I think it's worth it for us to, in every area of our lives, see ourselves as these lifelong learners. See ourselves as someone that can commit to learning something and actually learn it. When I first started jiu-jitsu, I was a mess. I would elbows everywhere. Like I would hit the people that was fighting on the side, Michael. But then today I am a very precise fighter because I learn. And in everything we can learn, everything we can grow, we might judge that the investment to learn and grow might not be worth it. This is okay. But it's not good for us to imagine that this growth is unattainable, because it probably is. And we'll probably surprise ourselves on how easy and how fast it is to develop this.
Even talking with one of my clients today, they were mentioning that, especially after practicing something for a period of time, then you get into a circle where people are also practicing the same thing. Wow, I actually have a fair amount of this because I practiced it, and it shows up. And I kind of also wanted to come to one of my core beliefs, is something that I'm playing with the Jedi Code, is that focus leads to knowledge, and knowledge practiced leads to wisdom. But that is part of this process we're going to be going through. So I just wanted to drop that as we're going to be coming back to it here in a little bit. Because as Bruno alluded to, what is that preparation for each day? What are you setting out? As an example, for one of my habits is to learn a little bit about a new language. So I personally am using an app called Duolingo, and I'm learning just enough Japanese in order to recognize maybe one word out of every 10,000. But it's something that is a habit of mine to continue, and it's preparing me for a potentiality where I may need to use that language. So that is part of my preparation. This is something that I want to be setting myself up to have access to more information, so I can use that and apply that and be of service because I've been exposed to it. But just taking in knowledge is not enough. That's why phase 2 is so important, is reviewing what you've learned And we've talked on the podcast already a couple of times about a couple of these tools that gets us there. So the big one is journaling. Write it down. That it really is about getting it out of our heads, and not just getting it out of our heads, but when we process it, when we actually make it into our own words, we're then allowing it to integrate into who we are. It's to me one of the first steps towards practicing this. Is I heard the person say this and I've applied it in the way my life looks like that, and this is what it looks like in my own words. This is how I interpret it. So I think that's a critical piece of this. It's something that Jim Quick says all the time, is knowledge is not power, it's only potential power. It's only powerful if you use it. I think that's extremely important, is where are you going to apply it? So there's many different ways to journal about this, but I know that you have some tools around that too.
Yes, I do journaling, and I am developing my journaling routines, my routines through journaling. And it's amazing. It's not only about writing it down, it's also about where are we writing it. Because if we write things and we put them all in notebooks, I have some 4 or 5 notebooks here that I used, and it's great. Sometimes I remember there was a time I was speaking with a friend, and she mentioned an idea that she had. It was a philosophical idea about the human being, and she placed this idea in a pyramid. And I was like, hearing her, and I was like, Jadi, her name. I was, Jadi, wait a minute, please. And I went and I got my notebooks and I sit in front of the computer and I started. And after some 10, 15 minutes, something like that, I found the note that I was thinking about. And I was like, I wanted to find this right now so you would believe me, but I have thought the same thing that you did. And I even had developed that thought further because it had a pyramid like a star, a Star of David, the Israeli symbol. I had another triangle that one was related to the body and the other to the mind. And I believe that she was talking about the one of the body. And I was like, I thought the same thing. I used very similar words to describe it. It was not something that people usually discuss. That idea that we don't have unique ideas. And Michael Jackson calling his producer on the middle of the night to produce an idea that he had about butterflies. And then the producer, Michael, can't we wait until tomorrow? And he's, no, if we don't do it, Prince will do. You know? And yes, life, there are frequencies which we are connected. And I don't know what this is. I have no idea. Don't ask me. It's like the story of the rock that rises on the sky. We spoke about this on the podcast before, and falls every day. You don't need to understand why it rises and why it falls. If in your word, the rock rises and it falls, when it falls midday, because it rises midnight and falls at midday, when it falls, you will not be under the rock. So you don't need to understand why it happens. This happens. And there are frequencies. People are connected to those frequencies. And it seems like they carry some ideas. And we might get them.
And sometimes we're listening on that particular station, on that particular channel at that time as someone else. I would agree with you 100%. It's like someone has sprayed out a bunch of ideas and see where it lands. So I love that idea.
And it's so journaling, it's not only about taking notes on these ideas, because sometimes we need to access these ideas. It's about accessing these ideas, visualizing these ideas, having this put into a frame that we can work with to build our lives, and not just have a thought and, okay, I can write it down, I can incorporate it better and things like that, but actually have it into a useful system, put it into a useful system. So that's why we use Notion. And I am very satisfied with Notion. I believe Michael's very satisfied with Notion. We have some friends that are very satisfied with Notion, and it's an incredible tool. I do recommend not only writing down, if you are interested in applying this. And by the way, writing down is another thing that is amazing because we learn how to organize information. When I first started writing down things on my notebooks, it was a mess. It was a complete mess, a complete confusion of informations. And I just understood the paragraph structure. I would just write things in paragraphs, Michael. And then I learned with my experience that I don't need to write paragraphs. I need to write keywords. I need to write topics. I need to write what is essential. Sometimes that is an observation, that is a phrase or something like that. But usually it is a title. And then there is like a phrase and topics. And I push to the side an arrow and there is an idea there. And suddenly, after journaling for a while, writing things down for a while, and I do recommend for you to write on paper because you exercise this ability as well, exercise as well thinking on paper, just for you to visualize. It's a tool. You will see that your notes, they will appear more like a map and that we can go through. And there is a line of thought that you can easily look and visualize information. And then we can use bigger tools like Notion that actually allows us to have this structure. We can incorporate mind maps too, and then allows us to have real deep information as well.
So that I like it. It wasn't, I'm glad that you went there. It wasn't something we had originally in our notes. Is journaling and writing down is really important, but also, as you said, the organization of that information as we're reviewing it and taking it from what we received and our perspective on it and how it actually moves in is sometimes it's writing it down. Sometimes it's drawing it out. It's a matter of how does your brain organize that? So I think keeping in mind that there are many different ways, many different tools that can get us there. Sometimes it's a mind map. Sometimes it is just a picture. Sometimes it's just stick figures, or maybe it's you need to write, you actually type out a narrative or bullet points. So I'm not saying that any one of those is the right way for everyone. I'm saying find a way that you can journal this, where you can record the information that you've actually received in a way that you can come back to it and can reconnect you with the energy that was at the time when you received it. Use that and get it so that you receive it and you synthesize it into a new form that you can actually better connect with.
One last thing that it's nice to consider about writing it down is that this whole process that we just described, it will help you when you are thinking, when you're strategically thinking. So for us to learn how to better deal with information on paper, on Notion, on everything else, I found out in my own experience that there is an effect of clarity and detail. That's the point. We learn to think in much more detail, pay more attention to detail, and digest information in detail, deconstruct it, because our mind is more used to this process. And even if we don't have the prop, remember about the props that we spoke so much, Michael's Kilt and things like that, and the life book and everything. Those are props, the paper, the Notion, those are props, those are tools, those are things that help us. They potentialize something that we wish to do. But sometimes, as we said about the props, using the props also increase our ability without it. So when we write it down, we are exercising, but when I'm talking here with Michael, I then am still under the effect that there are things that I exercise that are still with me, even without the paper, even without the Notion.
Because as we've talked about, is we remember things as pictures in most cases. Most people, I'm not saying everyone, most people actually, they remember visual signs rather than the actual words. So in fact, as we're learning to read, we become sight readers. So you can recognize the whole word, not have to sound out every single letter. We think in pictures in most cases. Actually, I knew somebody who I was working with who, when they looked at words, they saw colors. So when they looked at a word, it was spelled wrong when the color was not right. That's just the way that her brain interpreted it. But where I want to go to next is, if you don't quite have the clarity to then write it down, Sometimes for us to get to a space where we do have more clarity, sometimes we need to re-visualize it. We need to go back and actually re-experience that. So we are reviewing it, and that can come from a place of meditation and mindfulness. It is one practice that I know, especially if you're having trouble sleeping sometimes, is to go back and play through the highlights of your day, because it can certainly help you review what happened. And that is the mindfulness practice of checking things out. You can also re-visualize your day as well. So review it and then play it back how you wanted it to go if it didn't go the way you wanted to. It helps train your brain to then look for that outcome in the future. So that's another aspect of this logical construct of what we review and the tools potentially we can do that. Meditation can be really helpful for that, to go through that thought exercise of, okay, this is what happened, this is the outcome. If I wanted a different outcome, I would play it like this and it would get me there. That's another way for us to review. And with both of these, the intention of why we review it in this way is so we extract out the lessons, the successes, and the connections that we may not have picked up when we were in the midst of it. Bruno's actually mentioned a couple of times is that sometimes he picks up the lessons when we're on the editing side after we've already recorded it, because we're going back and reviewing and extracting out the lessons from this. Jim Quick also talks about is each time that you're experiencing a workshop or a training or reading a book, come from the mindset that you're going to be teaching it to someone else, because your brain will store it differently. And in that is when you review it, when you're coming back to it to teach it to someone else.
And this idea of learn as if you were teaching, it relates so much with journaling, writing it down, taking notes, structuring that information according to its hierarchy, according to that, and attention to detail. Because when we learn this information as if we were going to teach somebody, we pay much more attention to these details. We deconstruct the information better. Our notes are different. And it's impressive. It's so impressive, Michael. Like, I develop a big attention to detail and a nice capacity to absorb information. And what I realize is that thanks to that, thinking on paper and learning as if you were going to teach, when I committed that to study something that I was really interested about, because this is for things that we are very interested about. And I was like, I'm going to study this as if I were to teach someone else. I always surprise myself on how fast, if I did the diligence, if I was committed, if I wrote on paper, if I took notes, how fast I could teach. It was something about viewing the content one time, reviewing it, and making the notes. And then with my notes, not without the notes, but with my notes, I could clearly transfer that information, communicate that information to other people. You know, it was not from the heart, but I could communicate it clearly, because it's all about, do I understand this? How good do I understand this? If you understand it very well, if you know the definitions of the words, if you know the purpose of the thing, you'll be able to communicate it. You communicate it very properly.
Absolutely. And it is a matter of coming from this perspective of, I think it's Albert Einstein that said, if you can't explain this to a 5-year-old, you don't know the subject well enough. So it is reviewing that in a way that you are, yes, it's about getting the details, but it's also distilling out the details that are relevant. And it's one of the things that Bruno and I are working on is, how do we make this podcast be more streamlined so we're hitting the high points? So it's not an hour. We've done some hour-plus long podcasts up to this point. Is how do we make this really distilled down to what is useful in every day for people to be able to elevate their lives? But the other component I wanted to actually bring to this is, this review process is not the opportunity to beat yourself up. It's not the opportunity to, I heard a quote of, your bed is that magical place where you go to remember all the things you didn't do today. And that's not what this is about. It's about having the compassion with yourself of what did you accomplish? What did you get through? What did you not get to and why? Was it that the commitment wasn't to a level where that was required? Was there an interruption that actually took priority? And really coming from this place of compassion. Or it's reframing things. It's an opportunity to do that. Like I said, to revisualize something from this place of, okay, this is what happened. I could take this as the universe hates me. I could take this as I'm a horrible person, or I can take it from a lesson of what I can then do the next time. It's one reason why, to me, just the name of the company of Elevate Your Best isn't a matter of that you suck. It's a matter of I'm going to learn each time that I experience something so I can do it better the next time. Because if I keep repeating the same mistake over and over again, I'm just spinning on a wheel and I'm not going anywhere.
We tend to live the same experiences again and again in life. I wrote something. It was the content for the Mastering Authentic Networking class. People treat their lives like it is all a unique experience, and we ignore completely the fact it's usually, I'm talking like culturally, the typical culture around us. And in the fact that we actually live in patterns and that we repeat things all the time. We are like living in cycles. And this might be a cycle that we repeat several times every day, like drinking water or something like that, taking a shower. Or this can be a pattern that is being repeated every week or so, every month, every year. There are some patterns that might repeat every decade, depending on who we are, what we are doing. And you say, oh, Bruno, so this is an irrelevant pattern. Maybe not. Maybe somebody that is dealing with some paranoia, mental illness, or some drinking problem, and then every 5 years, that person has a major breakdown. And everybody in their family knows, oh, it's that time. And it's a pattern. It will repeat again. And it might be, and in this content, I mentioned that rare are the experiences that happen ever so often. I don't know if ever so often is the expression. It's like rarely in a lifetime. Those are rare. And legendary are those experiences like Robert Downey Jr. is doing, being Iron Man. It's something that we hear about. Like, oh, we know sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not, but we hear things about those are legendary experiences. But our everyday life, our everyday experiences, they are cycles and they repeat. So we better learn how to deal with them and how to handle things. And about what you said, Michael, I also think that there is an important information for us in learning and being a lifelong learner, which is we have the possibility to learn with anyone. Everybody has something to teach us. Even the homeless person. There is a homeless guy here in Brazil that he is a philosopher and people records video from YouTube. He shows to be homeless, like to live on the streets and live traveling. But this guy is known on YouTube and he's a philosopher. But perhaps it's the kid. Like I'm learning a lot with my niece and she has 3 years old. So everybody has something to teach us. And
Well, that's
that's a
even
great thing.
that's even one of my premise statements for parenting is kids remind us how to be curious and have fun. They are some of the best teachers because they question why we do things. Absolutely, I think that everyone has there's an ability for people to teach us something, even if it is how we don't want to do something. That can be the lesson. But the idea for me is that even an experience that could be framed as negative is we have an opportunity to say, okay, so what was the lesson in that? What did I do to get to the spot where that is what I experienced? If we're going to own 100% of our life, there's some step or some stage or something that we did in our life to put us on the path there. So how do we in the future avoid that so we don't experience it again? Because we're going to continue experiencing it until we learn to avoid it. This phase or this part of our review is also an opportunity for us to celebrate our wins, to really boost ourselves on what exactly are we accomplishing in our life? What's the progress we've made? This is once again a core pillar for my coaching practices. Let's celebrate the wins. As much as I know some people who just don't want to do it, they just want to be stuck in where they're failing. It's that victim versus victor mindset. Is a victim focuses on the problem. Victors focus on the solution.
Sometimes, Michael, the person doesn't have familiarity with celebration. I don't have familiarity with celebration. And this is a great cost in life. This makes things weight so much heavier because we are not taking the time to stop, celebrate, recharge, to have the recognition of others and people coming to us and say, hey, you done well, to have this type of moments. And it is something that I'm learning how to incorporate in my life right now. And everything that we didn't learn by culture, it's hard to learn. It's hard to implement. It's not easy. It has friction because we have already a programming set up there, which is the culture one. And we need to celebrate. It's extremely important. And I was preparing the files for the collection yesterday, and it was a very time-consuming work. And from time to time, I would stop and celebrate somehow with a little thing. So even if it was just something in my head, and that this is important because then we remember, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why is this important?
Absolutely. It doesn't need to be that you pop champagne every time or eat a treat or spend $10,000 on a new gadget or a toy. Sometimes it's just the acknowledgement of, holy cow, I've come this far. I can't, this is amazing what I've done. And it tends to be that in celebration, we also have appreciation and gratitude for the lessons we've learned, for the people who helped us get there, for the people who were lessons of how to or not to do something. So celebration is partly about that as well. It is the appreciation of how far we've come. Or maybe it's just the appreciation that we finally took the first step for something that we've been holding off on for a really long time. There's another aspect of this review part 2, and it's something that is one of those other pillars for me. It's the accountability aspect. It's, okay, I said I was going to walk a mile today. I walked 3. I can celebrate that. Sometimes it's, I walked half a mile. And what happened? It was minus 12 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So yeah, I could only go half a mile today. And in some ways that's looking at the preparation phase and not realizing that before the commitment was made that we didn't have the environment to do it in. But all that is part of that review phase. So what we learned, preparing and bringing that information in, what we review, what do we experience, and how are we recording that and synthesizing it into our life. And then we go on to the next section. The next phase is what we remember. So there is actually generally a half-life for how long we'll remember something. And it generally requires regular review to remind us of that. So Jim Quick, which I know we've mentioned quite a bit, to me, he is on my board of directors when it comes to the intellectual category, because he teaches a lot about memory and about processing and about collecting information in ways that we can then be able to bring it out and apply it. One of his big things is that knowledge plus emotion is equal to long-term memory. So if there isn't an emotional connection to that piece of knowledge, it's not going to stick around. Repetition helps as well with this, but if you're doing it, it's that trying to remember the state names and capitals when you're in history class. Who gives a hoot about that? I don't enjoy this. I'm bored to tears. So it's the only way many people really can learn that kind of knowledge is rote. They do it over and over again. But as someone who can connect a picture of traveling to a capital of a state, and they can see it, and they had a good time while they were there, or they hated it and they never want to go back there again. There's an emotion tied to that piece of knowledge. It becomes a lot easier for us to remember when those two components are attached. And that then comes from, is your mindset of, I'm bored with life and I'm going through the motions? Or is my mindset of, I am grateful and bringing joy to every possible interaction I have, and I can find the good in everything that's there. It helps elevate the emotions that are attached to that piece of knowledge.
I always like to say, Michael, that emotions are like the pressure that record the information. We have a life experience. A coach comes to us, he's tall, we are a kid, and he speaks in a harsh voice, and he says something negative towards ourselves. And then that gets recorded in our minds and defines us for so long in our lives, and we don't even remember anymore, but we are making daily decisions based on what that person said, because that was a very emotional process and it became recorded. And we were highly suggestible. When we are kids, we are highly suggestible. That's why events are so good as well, because events tend to bring a lot of emotions. They have a lot of people, and the more people in there, the more emotional. You leverage other people's emotion. That's why going to an event might be so beneficial. And not only in that, yeah, this idea of the emotions is something that it's like the fuel that makes so for us to save that information and actually take action. Because the emotions, they give us energy, like deciding to do something. I can decide to do something today. I can decide to go to New York today. But if I tomorrow wake up and just follow my day, and the next day, I'll never get to New York if I follow my day the way I'm taking it. But the moment I decide to go to New York, I can prepare, and then I will sleep. I'll have my routine, and the next day I'll wake up. Do I remember my decision the next day when I wake up? And what makes me remember that decision? It's the emotions. And deciding, like a decision, it is as good as how long we remember it. How long do we remember to wake up? When we wake up, we remember that we decided to change our lives, to make more money, to find a nice partner, to be a better parent or something like that. For how long? Because the moment we forget that decision, it kind of it goes away. And another thing that's very interesting about this is that when you were talking about remembering, Michael, and places, I do believe that our minds is very wired to remember things into places because of evolution. We remember the place where there is those trees with fruit, where the animals pass in the annual cycle. They only pass one time a year, and we gotta go there to get some. And where is the river? All those things. Where is the predator's lair? There is a diamond out there, a lion den. There is a lion's den out there. So we don't get that close of that area. All this is useful information. And when I go out, I meet a lot of people. And I was even mentioning to you, Michael, this week, that when I meet people, and sometimes I'm trying to remember what's that person's name or something like that, I noticed that the first thing that comes to my mind is the place where we were. Like, what's the name of that person? I met him. It's like the image comes like the place where we were. So our mind is very wired to do that. And if we know, we can search first for the place. We already know that the place is going to come first. So we search first for the place and we invite that memory in, and we open the way for us. There is a method that you mentioned. When I spoke about this, you mentioned a method.
Yeah, so it's the loci method, and it's something we're going to link to in the show notes for this, because Jim Quick actually talks about it very closely. And for many people, this is a fantastic way to connect with that kind of way of using your memory. Many times it is a matter of picturing, like you said, in the locality where you know them. But it's, once again, it's that how do we remember is many times it's, when we go to review, we do remember in pictures. We remember, it's that idea of, I remember faces, but I don't remember names. If we go back and actually start talking about creativity in this, is getting creative with the information. So As an example, if you meet someone and their first name is Harry, and you picture their face on the body of a werewolf who is hairy all over their body, you will remember that person's name is Harry for the rest of their life, because you just can picture that in your head. You've actually made it a little bit absurd, but at the same time, it's a way that you can relate, because it's one of the things that he really talks about really closely. Is one of the best ways to show someone that you care is by remembering their name. He's got several different methods to do that. And sometimes it is about where you met them from. Maybe it is a matter of visualizing them doing what they were doing, but sometimes it's playing with their name so that you actually stand out. Unfortunately for Bruno, two of the movies that I've actually watched recently, one was Luca, where it's Silencio Bruno, where he's talking about someone that just needs to be quiet.
Yes.
And then the other is Encanto, which is another Disney movie where Bruno is playing out as being the bad guy. I can relate to the way that Bruno shows up with these characters that I've seen in a movie, but I don't very often say Silencio Bruno, because I don't think he needs to shut up that often. But it's a matter of how do you connect in your head the imagery that goes with that person, so that the next time you run into them, you can remember their names. And it's a skill, though. So keep in mind that this is a skill, meaning that practiced makes it easier to do. So at one point I went to a reunion with my now wife, or it was a birthday party for one of her uncles. And there was like 100 people there. And I was able to remember, because at the time I was practicing this a lot, probably 75% of their names and who they were connected with. And I did a review afterwards because it was something I was practicing at the time. But it was from that particular experience at that location, at that party, that I can remember them from this place, like we said, of physically going there. But the loci method is also used in other places, or in another way. And that is the idea of imagining a space that you're really familiar with. Maybe it's your bathroom or your kitchen or your bedroom. And imagine that space and thinking of the fixtures that are always in the same space in that room. And then when you have a list of words, putting those words in that location in that room. So as an example, if I go into my bathroom, I actually have the tub, and then I have a handle, and then I've got the towel rack, and then I've got the toilet, and then I've got the sink, and then I've got a light switch. I can put a different, in my head, visualize a different word in each of those places. So then whenever I go to remember this, okay, so the tub was this word, and then the handle was something else. And imagine something hanging off the handle so I can remember it being there, or something that's actually like in the bottom of the tub. And then whenever I think about it, I can picture myself in that place. Okay, this was in this spot, and this was in that spot, and this was in this spot. And it's a way to build that mind palace.
That we do,
Exactly.
Like, what was in?
Exactly. And this is a way to then build your memory. And if you can do that in a larger space with larger number of fixtures, you can actually memorize potentially 10, 20, 100 things, because you put them in places that you can go back and remember. So that's the loci method. And I would definitely recommend that you look at the video that Jim Quick talks about. That it's one way that we remember after we've visualized it in a place that. I'm also a Harry Potter fan as well. And that they talk about the Bogart that comes out, which is your biggest fear showing up. And if you can imagine putting it in a ridiculous place, in fact, the command word was ridiculous, is you turn it into something that is absurd. It takes the power out of it. In this case, it actually adds the ability for us to remember it better when we make it a little bit awkward, or a little morbid, or a little extreme, or a little caricaturized and emphasized. It really helps us remember things. It's another way that we can use our creativity to remember.
Because of emotions, when we say we make something seem ridiculous, it adds some emotion, some fun. It detaches from the other patterns that are so equal. So it's easier for us to distinguish it and fetch from our memory.
Absolutely. So now we've covered the first 3 phases of this. So what we learn, what we review, and what we remember. And the last little piece is taking that to the absurd and maybe asking some of the questions that are more difficult to attach to it. Now, what does this mean to me? Where am I going to use this? is this relevant for me in this moment? Is this on purpose for me? Can also determine whether it is something we need to remember. I don't know many people who remember the phone book anymore. It used to be that you'd have 20 or 30 phone numbers in your head you could just rattle off because you had to remember to punch them in. For me, I remember those numbers in patterns. I don't necessarily remember what the number is. I've heard many people say is, I need to be at the keypad so I can do it. And then I can tell you what the number is because they visually remember the pattern. That's how I tend to remember numbers that way. And many times they're not relevant anymore because we have that device in our pocket that actually does that work for us. But so phase 4 of kind of this intellectual life. So we've got a system for what we learn to prepare for it, what we review, what we write down, what we record, what we synthesize. Then what do we remember? And ways of going back and reviewing that. Hopefully when we reviewed it, we organize it in a way we can remember it easier. But then what do we do with it when we're done? What do we create with it when we're done? This is sometimes that missing phase, that missing component of it is collecting knowledge for knowledge's sake isn't powerful. Just because you can win an argument with somebody because you're more than them, great, you will do fantastic on Jeopardy. That maybe will work for 0.1% of the population on the planet, but that knowledge isn't really going to be helpful until you can create something with it. You can produce a result by tapping into that and potentially connecting it to something that someone else hasn't ever connected those two ideas to. Like you mentioned earlier about the triangles and the physical versus the emotional. You had a way to visualize it. They had a way to visualize it. What are you doing with that? This is, I think, the space where we begin to start elevating our life. That's when we start producing something with it.
And I believe that this is not something that will happen just like that. Oh, I'm going to learn something today and tomorrow I'm going to apply it in my life. I know that it is not that hard to apply information in our lives. It's just that in the beginning, it's like there's too much to understand. So it's better for us to do the simple things. If you are in the beginning of a journey, start taking notes, start writing it down, start learning how to better think information, how to better process, how to better communicate it. Get familiar with the things you are curious about. Great thing to do. What am I curious about? And get familiar with those things. And then as we get familiar, we start to understand the topics, and it will get to a point where it's not to fall into the trap of knowledge. We are always consuming knowledge, like Michael said, and I always try to apply the knowledge. But it's a thing for me to get a cake recipe and try to do it, and then get, I don't know, try to do beef Wellington. It's like not that same thing. I need to cook for a little while before I try to do beef Wellington. That's what I'm saying, you know?
Right, is that very few times the knowledge that we learn a universal truth that applies everywhere. So I would agree with you on that. It's gaining that knowledge and being a scientist in our life instead of a researcher is another way, another analogy that I've heard. Is a researcher collects a bunch of information and makes a hypothesis, but a scientist says, okay, this is my hypothesis. Let's put those two atoms together and see if they blow up. It'll be awesome. So it's combining that knowledge and how it fits into the flow of the rest of the things that we're doing. And sometimes it may take us off on it may take us to a place we don't want to go. And sometimes it'll actually take us closer where we want to go. And that's then, to me, the end result of what knowledge has the power to do. Because knowledge sitting in a book on a shelf doesn't help. All of these I've read, and I've done my best to apply at least one principle from each of the books. But all the books over here, I haven't read yet. That's shelf help over there. It's an amazing amount of knowledge that's not getting applied yet. Partly because I'm not ready yet to synthesize more knowledge into wisdom. I'm practicing with the knowledge that I've gained so far. It's still allowing me to grow because I'm in phase 4 with the information I've already prepared. I've learned some. I've actually reviewed what I have available. I'm remembering it as I'm actually going through my coaching practices or here on the podcast or supporting people and being of service. And then there's the phase of being able to produce something with it. If it is a new program, if it is being interviewed on someone else's podcast, if it is writing up a paper, if it is applying it in programming that I'm doing or in a training that I'm pulling on, it's then apply it somewhere in your life. And with any knowledge that you're going to be exposed to, I feel you have to go through all 4 of these phases and then determine if it's essential anymore. You've learned it, you've reviewed it, and put it in your own words. You remember it when it's necessary, and you then apply it in a way that's with the intention of bettering yourself in the world and being that contributor to making the world a place where joy and happiness is readily available rather than pain and suffering.
And this thing about setting some knowledge to the side, it's very important, because a clear example is our cell phones, for example. If I am here talking with Michael and I'm on the podcast and, yeah, Michael, I agree with you, awesome, and I have the cell phone in my hands, I'm just creating a distraction. I'm just distracting the audience, distracting Michael, distracting myself. And sooner or later, I'm gonna take a look at it and then I'll be like, oh, okay. And when we are not using the thing, the object, the prop, we just get it, put it to the side and leave it there. It's not in our hands anymore. It's not being useful. It's not something that's helping us. It's the side. We spoke about this all the times. Get the things, put the tools that you're using that help you when you're not using, put them into the shelves. Like I see sometimes in the movies, some people, they have in the garage like a big board with a lot of tools that they hang. Leave the tools there. It's the place for the tools. When we need that, we go there, we get a hammer, we get a saw, we get something, a screwdriver, and we use it. And when we are finished, we drop it to the side? No, we get it to the shelf. And that applies to knowledge. I am learning, Michael, to remember some situations, some knowledge, some things that I used or I believed in or people told me. And when I remember and I recognize that they are not fitting for me anymore, I'm like, thank you. You helped me, you served me somehow on the past. I needed you. It was necessary for some situation. I don't know, maybe I just didn't know how to deal better with things. Right now, I don't need you anymore. Bye. And let it go. And this is very important because our mind keeps things. We don't notice, but it keeps things there. And we need to tell it, mind, let it go.
Well, it comes down to one of my other person on my board of directors for intellectual life is Albert Einstein. So I like a lot of his quotes. Is the mindset that created the problem is not the mindset that's available to fix the problem. I know I totally butchered that quote, but the idea of how you, in the space that you're in when you actually caused a problem to become your reality, until that mindset changes, the problem won't be resolved. That's that same idea of a tool may have worked. It's something that we talked about on the men's team fairly often is if you have a hammer does a job really well, it actually puts nails in, it allows you to pull nails out. You can also do other things with it, demolition. But if you try to use it on a screw, if you try to actually do wiring with it, it's not the right tool for the job. So as you're talking about having the tools on the wall, there is some level of diversification that we need, because a hammer, if the only tool you have is a hammer, it really only works on nails, but you can't treat everything and every problem in the world that all you just got to do is swing harder and it'll actually fix it. Sometimes you need to back it out. Sometimes you need to drill a hole ahead of time. There's so many other perspectives that we need to go with this for the right tools. And that's when practicing with this knowledge is really helpful, which is why the production phase is so important, is you're taking that knowledge and you're actually applying it in this situation, possibly a different situation. I love your cooking analogy. Is I know how to bake a cake, but how does that apply to cooking beef Wellington? It probably doesn't. It might, but to me, baking and cooking are two very different things. Baking is very much about chemistry and being very exact, and cooking for meats and vegetables can be a little bit more loosey-goosey, but that's just my perspective. But learning when to apply it, it's one of the things that a meeting a while ago, someone had made a comment about me, which it filled me up. I took it personally this time, is that I tend to choose the right tool and use the right amount of energy to get the job done, which I actually took as a huge compliment, because I think that the more we can do that, the less energy we waste that could be applied to the next challenge, the next problem, the next lesson, the next learning.
I always take things that people say positive about myself and I save it. Things that I like it. I always take it and I accept it. I learn to accept it. And particularly if more than one person is mentioning it. If more than one person mentions something and they are not connected, and so, oh, there's something there.
It's still taking it personally, but so it's in this process that we learn what is the situations that lead us to what we define as success. So that to me is what elevating your life is about. I'm moving towards what I define as success. May not be how Bruno defines it, may not be how someone else will define it. It's really about me moving towards that space. That's the elevation I'm talking about. Whenever we talk about the term of elevate your life, elevate your best, is to head closer to what the goal is. And it takes that experimentation to get there. I don't the term try, as we've discussed in the past, but to experiment, to put it through a trial and put it to a test, I think absolutely is. And that's taking action towards it versus let's try it. No, let's go do it and see what blows up. It'll be awesome.
Awesome. And also, Michael, this whole thing about learning, this whole journey, it taps a lot into how we contribute, not only in our careers, because our careers we learn studying the lifebook process is how we contribute to society, but how we contribute in everywhere in our lives, every area of our lives. How are we contributing even to ourselves? Can I go to a gym and actually do something that will empower my body and not distract it? And am I contributing to my sexual partner? Am I contributing to my family? Am I contributing to my peers, the people that are close to me? Am I contributing to the community? And so go on, like to Earth and everything. I think that this learning process is very important because there is a consciousness thing going there. Like many people have no consciousness about how many plastic that is in the sea and how this plastic is not being absorbed by Earth organism and just becomes molecules of plastic, microplastic, that is in our blood because we eat the food that is in the environment. And also about the biodiversity that we destroy, things like that, how much wilderness have we destroyed? Like about the plastic, for example, we bought an idea from the industry because the industry, they had this problem with this thing that they wanted to produce to sell, and it was easy to make, easy to use, and then you just throw away and it's done. But it's not only just like that. And then they sold us an idea that we should recycle when most of the plastic tagged as recycle is not recycled, not because it can't be, but because it's not profitable to. So we buy something, you say, oh, it's recycled, it's everything okay. But the industry is not recycling that because it's just not profitable. So it goes to the sea anyway. And we bought this idea and we think about bottles of water and noodles. And then 46% of the plastic in the oceans are fishing nets. So we are not aware of that. The real problem, we are not aware of it. And it's a matter of consciousness. It's a matter of understanding it. And the more we understand, the more we realize that this understanding is necessary, and we can contribute in several areas of our lives. And it might be that I don't buy product for this brand because this brand actually is killing dolphins or something like that. And this is what we should really do. Like we can really do when we expend our money into a business, we are saying to that business, I want more of you. We are sponsoring that business. We are investing in it. The best investment a business can get is a customer money. So I do believe that in this learning, we contribute a lot more because we learn, we grew, we became better person. And it's not just in our intellectual selves, like my brain's gonna be bigger. It's like a better parent, it's like a better member of society, and a better everything.
I think that as we're producing something new or producing something in a different way that people can connect with, even just you talking about nets that are catching fish in the ocean and how that's impacting what's going on in the environment. Not everybody connects with that from the sources that they're getting it from. And if you can reach one person with that message, I think that's really important for us to take the knowledge, review it, synthesize it, remember it, and then apply it and share it with the next person. Bring it in a way that it can help them make a conscious choice to live more intentionally with each choice you make, which each exchange of value, with each time and energy that you put into something. That's really the goal for me for Elevate Your Best, is let's live intentionally. Let's not be on autopilot and just go through the motions because someone else said that this is the track that you should be on. I don't feel like I'm jacked into the matrix and I've been given the program of this is where I want to go. That's not my belief. Maybe that is your belief, that this is the path that you're on. You can't get out of it. That's that fixed mindset that we've talked about, which is counter to where I feel that us as a species, as individuals, as a culture can actually move forward in a way that is ecologically aware and acknowledges where like you mentioned before, where everyone provides value. Everyone has some kernel of knowledge as a teacher, regardless of if you're 1 year old or 100 years old. There's some piece of knowledge that you've gained that person has not, and that exchange of knowledge, I think, allows us to make amazing contributions to the world. And with 7.5 billion people on the planet, that's a lot of knowledge. And unfortunately, doesn't matter how many books you read, it doesn't matter how many seminars you go to, there's more knowledge in the world than you will ever be able to experience, let alone remember. So I'm going to use a Brunoism with this part of the collective being of humanity. Each of us has the possibility to help lighten the load for everyone else, so that I can be a specialist in the area of the knowledge that I've collected and be able to synthesize that in a new way for someone else to be able to use without having to go through the research and the trials and the experimentation to get to a final result. I can say, don't go stand under that boulder in the next 5 minutes because it's going to fall, rather than someone sitting there and having to watch for 3 days to learn the pattern, because I've already done that. So let's actually help our fellow man when we've learned a lesson that works for us from that perspective and from the humility of this is what my experience. Your mileage may vary. And I think that really is what leads us into the legacy that we leave on the planet. It really is the way that we've transformed that knowledge into a way to serve other people. So to recap here, when we're talking about the power of this intellectual category, this intellectual phase, one of 12 of the categories that we focus on in the Lifebook framework. It really goes, for me, knowledge goes through 4 phases: what we learn, what we review, what we remember, and what we produce. And all phases are necessary, and we're in different phases throughout our lives. And with ideas and knowledge that's out there, and we can't always track where things are, but let's put some intention around this so that we can actually elevate our lives, elevate the lives of the people around us, and be that contributing factor. It's not just regurgitating knowledge, it's reframing it, rewording it so that it's in our own terms, so that that next person can understand it in a new and different way.
Yes. I don't have anything else to say, Michael, just to be thankful.
Awesome. Thank you, Bruno, for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate you spending the time and going through these different categories in a way that we can really dig into them, because I think that all of them are powerful and are key for our success and our fulfillment. And it's turning out really well for this. So thank you, everyone. For those who are listening as well, we will be doing one of these episodes once a month for the rest of this year. So health and fitness was last month, intellectual this month. Next month is the fun one, especially for us gentlemen and men, is the emotional category, your emotional life, which so many of us tend to shy away from or are scared of, which is part of that emotion. But combined emotion and knowledge, like we said, is where our memories get formed. So we look forward to talking to you next month. And however, we'll be talking to you next week, and we look forward to having a conversation with you. And until then, let's elevate your best. My name is Michael Danklefs.
Bye-bye, guys.
See you next week. Have a fantastic weekend. Bye now.